The talk you are about to hear is by Roshi Amala Wrightson, teacher at the Auckland Zen Centre. For Teisho this morning, we'll be looking at a work, Verses from the Centre, by Nargajuna, translated by Stephen Batchelor. This will be 2 parts, so this is going to be part 1. Nargajuna is our 14th Zen ancestor. On Tuesday, last Tuesday evening, I gave a teisho on another of our Dharma ancestors, Daiun Sogaku Harada Roshi, who was Roshi Keplo's first teacher. But now we're going way, way back to India. And so Nargajuna was the 14th ancestor, counting up from Shakyamuni Buddha. And he's featured in our long ancestral line and our short ancestral line, where we chant Ashvagosha honored one, Nagarjuna honored one, Vasubandhu honored one. So he's an important figure for us. And he's one of the most important philosophers in Buddhism. And he's the founder of the Madhyamika, or Middle Way School. We can look at Nagarjuna in 2 ways. There's the historical Nagarjuna, who we don't know much about, and then there's the mythical Nagarjuna, and there's quite a bit more on his mythical side. So for historic background, Nagarjuna was born into a Brahmin family in the 2nd century of the Common Era. And he later became a Buddhist, as many famous Buddhist teachers did in the day, coming out of a dominant Hindu culture. It was said that he was an advisor to a king of the Satavahana dynasty who ruled the Deccan Plateau in India. And a large number of texts are attributed to him and form important teachings in Chinese, Tibetan, Korean, and Japanese Buddhism. That's about all the scholars can agree upon. We don't know how he died or when he died. Now, for the mythic background, Nagarjuna's name comes from Naga, meaning serpent, and Arjuna, a type of tree. And according to tradition, Nagarjuna was born under a tree and was instructed in the esoteric teachings by the Nagas in their palace under the sea. These Nagas are serpent deities in India, protectors of the Dharma. And when Buddhism traveled to China, Nagas became dragons, a feature of ancient Chinese culture. So he went under the sea, and there in a cave, he is said to have discovered the Prajna Paramita Sutras. And the Prajna Paramita Sutras is a vast body of sutras. And we chant the Heart Sutra in our chanting services. That's part of the Prajna Paramita body. And then there's the Heart Sutra and many other texts from the Prajna Paramita Sutras. Just read a little bit more. about the legend of Nagarjuna and the Nagas. According to legend, Nagarjuna was an abbot at the great Buddhist monastery university at Nalanda. He was a great debater and vigorous supporter of the Mahayana doctrine, teaching to large audiences in the monastery. At one time, he noticed that whenever a certain two young men attended his teachings, the entire area became filled with the fragrance of sandalwood. And when they departed, the fragrance disappeared. When Nagarjuna questioned them about this, they replied that they were actually not human beings, but sons of the Naga king, and that they had anointed themselves with sandalwood paste as a protection against human impurities. They told Nagarjuna that in the time of the Buddha, the Nagas had attended the Buddha's discourses on the perfection of wisdom, and that because few human beings had understood the discourses, they had written them down to save them for a time when a human being would be born who could understand them. They invited Nagarjuna to their kingdom to read the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. And he accompanied them to their underwater world. After some time in the kingdom of the Nagas, Nagarjuna returned to the human realm to teach what he had learned, bringing the 100,000 stanza Perfection of Wisdom sutras with him. Nagarjuna took his name from his encounter with the Nagas, and the 70 stanzas on emptiness, which we'll be reading from, is one of his expositions on the Madhyamika system, which he learned from the sutras in the keeping of the Nagas. Just a little bit more on the mythic side. In Zen Master Keizan's Denkoroku, the record of the transmission of light, after transmitting the Dharma to the 15th ancestor, Kanadeva, they both shared the teaching seat. When Nagarjuna preached the Dharma to the people, remaining seated, he showed himself in the form of the full moon. Kanadeva explained to the people, "This is the Venerable showing us the very form of Buddha nature by manifesting it. When you think about it, the shape of the formless samadhi is like the full moon. The meaning of Buddha nature is clarity and empty brightness." When he finished speaking, the disk vanished and Nagarjuna assumed his original form. Just a few words about the translator, Stephen Batchelor. He was born in Scotland, and in the early 20s he began to study Tibetan Buddhism and learn Tibetan. But at a certain point he began to question Tibetan doctrines. In his own words, "After 8 years of being a Tibetan Buddhist, I could take it no more. Neither the doctrinal studies nor Vajrayana practices were working for me. So I travelled to a monastery in South Korea, where I trained in Son, the Korean version of Zen. I trained in Son meditation for 4 years under the guidance of Kusan Sunim, who was recognized as the greatest Korean Buddhist teacher of the 20th century. All I did, 3 months each summer and 3 months each winter, was face the wall and ask myself, what is this? Which is a koan that some people work on here at the Auckland Zen Centre. What is this? I abandoned the search for answers and focused instead on the questions. This questioning continued on his return to England, and he became a secular or agnostic Buddhist practitioner. One of his best-known books is Buddhism Without Beliefs. And Stephen Batchelor was one of the guest speakers at the Rochester Zen Center's 30th anniversary in 1996, at the time that Roshi and I were living and studying at the Rochester Zen Center. And we got to talk with Stephen Batchelor a bit informally, and he's really, in Italian you say, he's simpatico, really, yeah, good guy, very astute, fine intellect. And we were talking a bit, and I think we asked him about the Dalai Lama and Zen. And he sort of rolled his eyes and said, oh, because he knew the Dalai Lama well. And he said, oh, the Dalai Lama knows nothing about Zen. He thinks that Zen's just about emptiness. And which, of course, it's not. Emptiness is important, seeing into the emptiness of the self, our small self. But Zen's about responsiveness, about engaging with the world. Just this. Yeah, that was the Dalai Lama's view of Zen. For people who don't know much about Buddhism or Zen, when you talk about emptiness, it can seem a little bit daunting. Like there's this black void where everything disappears into. Sort of has a negative tinge, if you like. So there are numerous teachings, like antidotes to this negative view of emptiness. Because emptiness in Zen and Buddhism is quite wonderful. So I'll just read a few quotes. First one is from Sensei Choki Lodro, a Tibetan teacher. Emptiness is not a mere nothingness. It manifests spontaneously as radiant wisdom, and from it, awareness and compassion shine forth. So out of emptiness, the experience of emptiness, comes awareness and compassion. A modern Zen teacher, Seikan Hasegawa, Shunyata, which is the Sanskrit for emptiness, not only means to enter into emptiness, but also means coming back from emptiness. That's the important thing, coming back from emptiness. It is not only to make everything empty, but to be alive to everything. Yamada Koan Roshi, Aiken Roshi's teacher. The common denominator of all things is empty infinity, infinite emptiness. But this emptiness is full of possibilities. Emptiness is full of possibilities. And two Zen capping phrases. Capping phrases are used in Rinzai Zen after you've passed a koan. In traditional Rinzai Zen, you then have to choose a capping phrase that points to your understanding from a book of capping phrases, and there's over 1,000. So in Japan, these monks would carry around these capping phrase books, and in the spare time they would leaf through trying to find a appropriate capping phrase to cap their koan and show their understanding. So two capping phrases. Emptiness is an infinite storehouse with flowers, the moon, and tall towers. Another capping phrase, which I particularly like. Emptiness rides an iron ship. Sometimes in the paradoxical teachings of Zen, emptiness is associated with iron, the most solid of forms. An iron bull or an iron ox. This is just to get us away from imagining emptiness as just being nothing, It's solid at times. And of course, form is only emptiness. Emptiness only form. Stephen Batchelor writes a fine opening essay, about 80 pages, on verses from the Centre. So we'll begin by reading his commentary, his introduction. And he begins, Nargajuna is the poet of emptiness. For the first 500 years after his death, the Buddha was remembered as an emptiness. In the fragments of stone friezes that survive from that time, he is represented by an empty seat, a tree with no one beneath it, a pair of footprints, or the wheel of the Dharma that he set turning. It was not until Greek settlers came to India and converted to Buddhism shortly before the time of Nargajuna that the Buddha was first personified. And sometimes he took on the form of the Greek Apollo. And if you ever have the chance to travel to China or Japan and go to museums, these wonderful Gandharan statues of the Buddha and bodhisattvas wearing Greek or Roman robes. It's a fascinating period with the Greek influence on the depiction of early Buddha figures. Batchelor goes on. In reply to the question, what is liberation of mind through emptiness? An early Buddhist discourse describes how a monk, gone to a forest or to the roots of a tree or to an empty hut, reflects, this is empty of a self or what belongs to a self. This is liberation of mind through emptiness. And Batchelor comments, just as nature or an abandoned building is devoid of human ownership, so experience is intrinsically neither me nor mine. Recognizing mental and physical process as empty of self was, for the Buddha, the way to dispel the confusion that lies at the origin of anguish. For such confusion configures a sense of self as a fixed and opaque thing that feels disconnected from the dynamic, co-arising, and fluid process of life. So a lot of our problems come from our sense of a fixed self. I'm like this. That's the way I am. I'm always going to be like this. It's not true. Things are always changing. And emptiness can help unglue us from our attachment to a separate self. He goes on, emptiness does not deny these vital processes of life. It challenges the insistent fixation about self that obscures them, thus rendering them flat, frustrating, and repetitive. Emptiness is a cipher of freedom. Emptiness is a cipher of freedom. For freeing us up. Freeing us up. This is one of the beauties of Sesshin as we go on. We have which might seem from the outside to be a very strict structure in Sesshin with the rounds and the bells, but in the structure we can find a real freedom, a freedom to turn inward and to unite with our practice. Then he quotes Dogen. For Dogen, this is what Dogen says, all things play in emptiness. Every moment of Zazen is like a hammer striking emptiness, whose exquisite peel permeates everywhere. Every moment of Zazen is like a hammer striking emptiness, whose exquisite peel permeates everywhere. Sometimes your Zazen might not feel like this, but then a tui calls. That's exquisite. Or you're outside and you see the shadow of a tree on the green grass. That's exquisite. That's a faint echo of emptiness, of empty mind. To dwell in emptiness means living with the ambiguity and non-dualistic nature of life. This is clear from the Buddhist response to the question of Katyayana, who was an early disciple. Katyayana, everything relies on the duality of it is and it is not. It is and it is not. Everything exists is simply one extreme, and nothing exists is the other extreme. The Tathagata relies on neither of these two extremes. He teaches the Dharma of the middle way. So not getting caught up in everything exists. There's a soul that goes from life to life, and not to get caught up in nothing exists, but to navigate between the two. We'll come back to this. Batchelor continues, while the middle way is grounded in insight into the emptiness of self, it expands the experience of emptiness that resists any attempt to pin this down to this or that. The key to Nargajuna's verses from the center lies in his understanding of emptiness as inseparable from the co-arising of life itself. Moreover, the emptiness experienced by easing one's obsessive hold on a fixed self or on things is declared by Nagarjuna to be the Buddha's middle way. And he quotes a verses from the center. When emptiness is possible, everything is possible. Were emptiness impossible, nothing would be possible. He continues, emptiness is a way of talking about the sublime depth, mystery, and co-arising that are revealed as one probes beneath the surface of anything that seems to exist in self-sufficient isolation. Yet for something to be empty does not imply that there is nothing at all. Think of the flowers and the moon and the tower, the tall tower. Another verse from Nagarjuna. Were there a trace of something, there would be a trace of emptiness. Were there no trace of anything, there would be no trace of emptiness. Nagarjuna is always presenting us with these conundrums, these paradoxes, to highlight what we chant, form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Batchelor continues, throughout Zen teachings, there are warnings about not dwelling in emptiness or not getting caught up in thoughts about emptiness. Emptiness cannot be grasped by conceptual thinking. And we'll take this up in the second part of our talk. But there's a Zen dialogue that really illustrates this between two disciples of the great Chinese teacher Matsu. Shi Kung asked, "Can you grasp emptiness?" Shi Tang said, "Yes." Shi Kung, "How do you do it?" Shi Tang closed his hands around the empty space between them. So it went like that. This is my demonstration of emptiness. Shirkung, you don't know how to grasp emptiness. Shitang, how would you do it then? So Shirkung grabbed Shitang's nose and gave it a good pull. Ouch! You're pulling off my nose, said Shitang. And Shirkung, that is the way to grasp emptiness. Giving his nose a good tweak. Very direct, very personal. The pain that Shitang felt, the ouch, wiped away all concepts of emptiness. Batchelor has an interesting sort of sideline on emptiness. Until the 15th century, zero was a Spanish word used to pronounce the Arabic shifr, which gave us the English cipher. When Arabic-speaking Muslims settled in Spain, they brought with them a system of arithmetic that included a symbol for zero. This was to provide indispensable in constructing the mathematics now used in everything from quantum physics to computer programming. The Muslims had discovered the idea in India, and the Arabic shifr, being their pronunciation of Sanskrit shunya, empty, which from the 9th century has been used in India to represent the mathematical notion of zero. Shunya means empty, and the term Nagarjuna used is the key to understanding what the Buddha taught. Thus, shunya became shifr, then cipher became zero. Another verse from Nargajuna. Just as a child is born from father and mother, so consciousness springs from eyes and colourful shapes. Batchelor. One might intuitively believe consciousness, the most private and enduring feature of oneself, to be more real than the passing phenomena of which it is aware. Consciousness feels like a solitary witness, already there within us, lying in wait for things to appear. For Nagarjuna, this is but a convenient illusion. Consciousness is meaningless unless it is conscious of something. It's an important point. Consciousness is meaningless unless it is conscious of something. It is inextricable from the sense organs and the objects that enable it to take place. It is dependent and ephemeral as the flickering displays of colour and shapes it beholds. So, Nagarjuna, so consciousness springs from eyes and colourful shapes. What Nagarjuna is referring to here is a very important Buddhist teaching, that of dependent co-arising, which we don't have time to go into today, but just briefly, dependent co-arising are 12 links in a chain of existence that keeps us in the world of suffering, in the form of a wheel, and the wheel keeps turning. So in early Buddhism, for the monks, the followers of the Buddha, the aspiration was to get off the wheel of birth and death, the wheel of dependent co-arising. And the 12 links are ignorance, that's at the beginning, karmic formations, what's carried over from a previous life, consciousness. Okay, this is where consciousness comes in as number 3. Then from consciousness arises mind and body, and then from mind and body arises the 6 senses. In Buddhism, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind is the sixth one. And from mind and body arises the six senses, and from the six senses arise contact, which are sense impressions created by the sense organs and the objects of the senses. That's colour and shapes, sounds, smells, taste, tactile sensations. So consciousness springs up, then consciousness gives rise to body and mind gives rise to the six senses. And then what they interact with in the outside world, and also thoughts as well. And then briefly, those are the first six, and the next six are feelings, cravings, clinging, becoming, birth, and the 12th is old age and death. And then the wheel begins turning again. The Mahayana takes on the teachings of dependent co-arising, but it also gives it a positive spin, because all these factors, all these links arise together. And so the Mahayana focuses on interrelationship. Everything arises with everything else. There's no separate self and there's no separate phenomena. We depend on everything else. We're interwoven with everything else. Everything supports us. In sesshin, yes, each person attending sesshin works on their own practice, but we're supported by the people around us who are working on their practice. We're interwoven into a group in sesshin, and we're supported by monitors, teacher, timer, the cooks, the food, this great retreat center, Belaraka. Everything supports us. We're not separate from us all. Batchelor. Towards the end of the verses, Nargajuna announces that dependent co-arising is emptiness. So he sees this great wheel of birth and death, of the 12 links, which is also in Tibetan Buddhism depicted as a mandala. We have one at the center with illustrating the 12 links, that all this is empty, is emptiness. To recognize that things are codependent is the key to understanding what it means for them to be empty. A self, a plant, a body is empty because it is incapable of being neatly circumscribed as a thing cut off from other things. So everything is interconnected, co-arising, and intrinsically empty. The most basic formulation of dependent co-arising, and if this sounds too technical or too complex, you can boil it down. And in the words of the Buddha, because of this, there is that. Simple as that. Because of this, there is that. And if there wasn't this, there would not be that. Hindu teacher Nisargadatta puts it this way. Wisdom tells me I am nothing. Love tells me I am everything. And in between the two, my life flows. Wisdom, prajna, we can say prajna wisdom in Buddhism, tells me I am nothing. Wisdom tells me I'm empty. Love tells me I'm everything. I'm connected with everything. And between the two, my life flows. This is the middle way. Batchelor continues. In the homage that opens verses from the center, Nagarjuna praises Buddhas as being those who teach dependent co-arising and ease fixations. So he praises Buddhas as those who teach dependent co-arising and ease fixations. This is what Buddhism, the really therapeutic aspect of Buddhism, is it teaches us to let go of our grip on the self, on our small self, and to partake of a world that's greater than us, that we're part of. Because of this, if we really take the teachings to heart and practice it on the mat, then we're not so caught up with our concerns, our anxieties, our ever-changing moods. It's not something that happens overnight, but year after year, sticking with the practice, we just become unglued, a little bit more unglued from our self and our concepts about ourself. It comes a very important passage from Stephen Batchelor. He talked about fixations, about Buddhas who can ease fixations. Fixations about self and things sustain the largely unconscious holding pattern in which we hover above the world of immediate experience. Fixations about self and things sustain the largely unconscious holding pattern in which we hover above the world of immediate experience, or which we can say, which separates us from immediate experience. He continues, although fixations appear to freeze the self into an undisturbed, isolated cell, the tightness of the grip spawns chaotic torrents of thoughts, images, and emotions. Like squeezing the trigger of a gun or pressing a button to set off an alarm, fixations such as egoism, craving, conceit, and holding opinions erupt as proliferating streams of longings and worries. So we can find ourselves fixating on things, of desires arising, of becoming caught up in desires and entering a fantasy world, or stuff from the past coming up, grievances that we've had since childhood, and we cling on to them and we squeeze them. The more we squeeze them, the more stuff comes out. We can just release the hand that squeezes. See that these things are impermanent. They arise and then they dissolve. So he says, like squeezing the trigger of a gun or pressing a button to set off an alarm, fixations such as egoism, craving, conceit, and sticking to opinions erupt as proliferating streams of longings and worries. And this age of conspiracy theories, this is a clear example of, Batchelor wrote this, I think, back in the early 20s, when there weren't so many conspiracy theories, but now they just abound, and you can see how people are just fixated on conspiracy theories. They get caught up in them, and they enter on social media echo chambers where their beliefs are just reflected back on them. And you can see the squeezing and how more stuff shoots out the tighter they hold on to their opinions and their beliefs. So, although the proliferating thoughts triggered by fixations can be contained, can be held in check by ethical commitment, adhering to the precepts, and neutralized by meditative absorption, by sitting. When we sit, the longer we sit, the more we can see into these things that arise in the mind. They are resolved, according to Nagarjuna, by emptiness. By just, in some way, just seeing how empty they are, and how at times how pain-producing they are to ourselves and others around us. And he quotes a verse, "Fixations spawn thoughts. They provide compulsive acts. Emptiness dissolves fixations." Emptiness dissolves fixations. We are not what we think. We're not, in the long run, what we feel. Well, who are we? He continues, through his verses, although his verses explore assumptions about self, nowhere in verses from the center does Nargajuna equate emptiness with the negation of self. That's an important point too. It's not that we have to abandon ourselves, our character, our uniqueness. It's part of who we are. We just have to see through our notion of a fixed ego identity. Thinking of the middle way that Nargajuna always returns to, were mind and matter me, I would come and go like them. I would come and go like thoughts, like my body aging. If I were someone else, they would not say anything about me. If I were something else, they would not say anything about me. My character, my identity would disappear. So it's neither one nor the other. We have this body to work with. We have this mind to work with. We were born from parents. We were raised in certain ways, influenced by our parents, by our teachers, for good or for bad. But we're more than this. From the very beginning, from the acorn that produced us when we came out of the womb, to mix metaphors a bit, but the acorn, at the very beginning, that unfolds into an oak tree. Each one of us, when we came into this life, is like an acorn, and we remain true to that acorn as best we can as we grow in time and develop. With that acorn is our true nature that never leaves us, no matter how fixated we become on things. Were mind and matter me, I would come and go like them. If I was something else, they would not say anything about me. So, the middle way. Through our life, our sense of being continues. As I said, we're all unique. Each of us has a unique character, unfolding from our earliest years. And yet, at the same time, our Buddha nature, our enlightened nature, is interwoven through our very being, from the very beginning, here to be realized. Here to be realized by being fully absorbed in our practice, round after round, day after day. Sesshin offers us the opportunity to get a glimpse of this true self that is no self. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. The teaching you have received is offered freely. If you would like to make a donation to support the continuation of this podcast service or learn more about practice opportunities at the Auckland Zen Centre, please visit www.aucklandzen.org.nz.